What if one ordinary phrase, just 3 words long, could change the way you look at an entire investigation? In the Nancy Guthrie case, countless people have focused on the blood outside her home, the masked figure captured on surveillance video, the unanswered ransom messages, and the long months without an arrest. Those details have dominated headlines and online discussions. But recently, investigators and reporters found themselves paying closer attention to a different clue. It wasn't a fingerprint. It wasn't DNA. It wasn't a piece of surveillance footage. It was the expression, "on a silver platter." At first glance, it sounds like an everyday saying. Most people have heard it before. But when it appeared inside one of the messages connected to the investigation, many began asking whether it revealed something about the person who wrote it. Was it simply colorful language? Or was it an accidental glimpse into the writer's age, background, or even their relationship to the case? That question has become one of the most closely watched developments in an investigation that remains filled with uncertainty. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home near Tucson, Arizona, during the night in early February 2026. She was 84 years old. Her disappearance immediately drew national attention because she is the mother of television journalist Savannah Guthrie. From the beginning, investigators said the circumstances were unusual. According to the FBI, blood belonging to Nancy was found near the front entrance of her home. Surveillance footage released days later showed a masked individual outside the residence during the time investigators believe she disappeared. Officials asked the public to study the images carefully, hoping someone might recognize the person's clothing, movements, or equipment. Despite hundreds of tips, searches across southern Arizona, and extensive forensic work, no confirmed public breakthrough has brought investigators to Nancy herself. As weeks turned into months, another part of the case became increasingly complicated. Messages claiming to come from people connected to Nancy's disappearance began arriving. Some demanded large amounts of Bitcoin. Others claimed Nancy had already died. Still others suggested the writers possessed information or evidence that could solve the case. Each new message generated headlines. Each one forced investigators to decide whether they were dealing with genuine kidnappers, opportunists seeking money, or people simply trying to insert themselves into one of the country's highest-profile missing person cases. According to the FBI, several widely publicized ransom messages have now been determined to be fraudulent or unrelated to whoever is responsible for Nancy's disappearance. One person was even charged after allegedly sending a false ransom communication to the family. But authorities have also emphasized that not every communication has been dismissed. Some continue to be examined as potentially legitimate, meaning investigators are still separating genuine leads from deliberate distractions. That distinction matters. It means every word inside those communications has been examined carefully, not just for fingerprints or digital evidence, for language, for habits, for clues hidden in plain sight. Language analysis has long been used in criminal investigations. Detectives sometimes study spelling, grammar, vocabulary, and recurring expressions. While language alone rarely identifies a suspect, it can sometimes suggest education, regional background, or age. It can even show whether multiple messages were likely written by the same person. But investigators must be careful. People intentionally disguise the way they write. They copy phrases from movies. They imitate someone else's style, or they deliberately plant misleading clues. So any conclusions drawn from wording alone remain only possibilities, not proof. That's where the phrase "silver platter" entered the conversation. One message reportedly claimed the sender possessed evidence that would deliver investigators the perpetrators on a silver platter. Versions of that wording quickly spread through media reports and online discussions surrounding the case. The expression itself isn't unusual. It has existed for centuries. It generally means giving someone exactly what they want without requiring effort. But some observers immediately notice something interesting. The phrase feels more common among older generations than younger ones. That observation led to endless speculation. Could the writer be older? Could they have grown up hearing expressions that younger people rarely use? Or was someone intentionally choosing familiar language precisely because they knew investigators would notice it? None of those questions has an official answer. Law enforcement has never publicly stated that the phrase identifies the author in any meaningful way. Still, people who study communication point out that habitual expressions can sometimes be surprisingly difficult to fake consistently. At the same time, there's another possibility. Someone hoping to mislead investigators might intentionally include memorable phrases that encourage exactly this kind of analysis. If that's true, then the wording could tell investigators almost nothing at all. That's why experienced investigators generally refuse to build a case around language by itself. They compare it against digital evidence, against timelines, against financial records, against phone data, against physical evidence collected during the investigation. Only then does a linguistic clue become meaningful. Meanwhile, the FBI has continued treating Nancy Guthrie's disappearance as an active kidnapping for ransom investigation, despite the growing number of false messages that have surfaced publicly. Officials have repeatedly cautioned that false tips and fake communications consume valuable investigative resources and can delay genuine progress. For Nancy's family, every new message has carried emotional weight. Each claim creates hope for answers. Each false lead brings another disappointment. And every public rumor risks pulling attention away from verified facts. That's why investigators continue asking the public to distinguish carefully between confirmed information and speculation. The confirmed facts remain surprisingly limited. Nancy disappeared. Blood identified as hers was found outside her home. A masked individual appeared on surveillance footage. Numerous messages have been received. Some have been ruled out as hoaxes. Others remain under review. Beyond that, much of the public conversation consists of theories rather than confirmed evidence. But here's where the investigation becomes even more interesting. If the phrase silver platter wasn't important by itself, why has so much attention focused on it? The answer may have less to do with those three words, and far more to do with how investigators compare that message to every other communication received in the case. And that comparison reveals a pattern few people noticed at first. Investigators eventually realized that understanding the messages meant looking at more than just individual words. They needed to compare every communication side by side. The timing, the phrasing, the demands, and even the punctuation could reveal whether they came from the same person or from several different individuals trying to take advantage of a case already receiving national attention. According to investigators, that process has been slow and methodical. Every message has to be examined on its own before it can be compared with the others. A message that appears convincing at first may fall apart once digital evidence is reviewed. Another that seems unimportant may later match information known only to investigators. That is one reason the public often learns very little about an active investigation. Detectives rarely explain exactly why they believe one lead deserves attention while another does not. Releasing too much information could make it easier for someone to fabricate a believable story or interfere with evidence that has not yet been made public. In the Nancy Guthrie investigation, officials have repeatedly emphasized that many details remain known only to law enforcement. Those undisclosed facts are important because they allow investigators to test the credibility of anyone claiming to have inside knowledge. Imagine someone contacts authorities and claims to know where Nancy is or what happened to her. Investigators are unlikely to accept that claim at face value. Instead, they may ask questions that only the person responsible could answer. If the responses do not match the undisclosed evidence, the lead quickly loses credibility. That approach has been used in countless criminal investigations over the years. It protects the integrity of the case while helping detectives separate genuine information from false claims. The public, however, often sees only part of the picture. News reports may describe a newly released message or a statement from investigators, but they rarely include everything detectives already know. That gap between public information and investigative knowledge can lead to speculation, especially in a case involving a well-known family. As more reports appeared, online discussions became increasingly active. Some people believed the wording of the messages pointed towards someone familiar with Nancy or her family. Others argued the messages sounded like the work of someone seeking publicity or financial gain. Still others suggested the communications may have come from more than one person. At this stage, none of those possibilities has been confirmed publicly. Investigators have not announced that the messages came from a single author, nor have they identified any suspect based solely on the language that was used. That distinction is important because language evidence is only one small piece of a much larger investigation. Digital forensic experts can examine where a message originated, whether devices were used to hide a sender's location, and whether metadata connects one communication to another. Financial investigators can trace cryptocurrency transactions when ransom demands involve digital payments. Surveillance specialists compare camera footage from multiple locations to establish timelines and identify vehicles or individuals. Each discipline contributes another piece of the puzzle. Sometimes those pieces fit together quickly. Sometimes they do not. In this investigation, authorities have remained careful about discussing what evidence they possess. Public statements have generally focused on requesting information from anyone who may have seen suspicious activity or who may recognize details already released by investigators. That careful approach has also extended to the family's public comments. While expressing hope for Nancy's safe return, family members have largely avoided discussing specific investigative details. That decision is consistent with the advice families often receive from law enforcement during active kidnapping investigations. Publicly revealing too much information can unintentionally complicate negotiations or interfere with investigative strategies. Meanwhile, the phrase, "on a silver platter," has continued to attract attention because it stands out from the rest of the publicly known communications. Some experts in forensic linguistics have noted in other criminal cases that repeated expressions or uncommon wording can sometimes help compare anonymous writings. But they also caution that no single phrase should ever be treated as proof of identity. People borrow expressions from friends, relatives, television programs, books, and everyday conversation. A familiar saying may reveal nothing more than a habit picked up years earlier. That is why investigators look for patterns instead of isolated examples. Do multiple messages share the same unusual spelling? Do they make the same grammatical mistakes? Do they repeat uncommon expressions? Do they follow the same sentence structure? When several of those characteristics appear together, investigators may begin considering whether the communications came from the same source. Even then, additional evidence is required before drawing conclusions. In the Nancy Guthrie case, officials have not publicly released the full contents of every message connected to the investigation. As a result, outside observers are working with only a fraction of the available information. That limitation is easy to overlook. A single sentence reported in the news can quickly become the focus of public discussion, even though investigators may possess dozens of additional messages, forensic reports, interviews, and digital records that have never been released. For experienced detectives, context matters just as much as the words themselves. Who sent the message? When was it sent? How was it delivered? What happened immediately before and after it arrived? Those questions often prove more valuable than any single phrase. As investigators continued comparing every available piece of evidence, one possibility gradually began receiving more attention than the others. It wasn't simply what the messages said. It was whether the person writing them actually knew something that had never been made public. Answering that question could determine whether investigators were dealing with a hoax designed to exploit a family's tragedy or someone much closer to the truth. And that is exactly where the investigation takes another unexpected turn.